Dungeons: The Eye of Draconus is a 2.5D beat-em-up in the vein of Golden Axe and Streets of Rage, and it's also a deliberate parody of Golden Axe and sword and sorcery fantasy in general. It features a group of 3 protagonists who are definitely not heroes that seem to be adventuring together just because it's convenient to get them what they want. And all of them are fairly one-dimensional caricatures, with the exception of perhaps Gleobren the cleric, who happens to be 2-dimensional in some instances. They're not likable, they're hard to root for, and you're stuck with them through the whole game. The game is also surprisingly narrative-driven, which exacerbates this issue. There are a lot of cutscenes, there's a lot of dialogue, and all of the dialogue is voiced dialogue. This game really cared about its narrative. There's exactly one scene where the dark humor is used to artful effect when an innocent village asks the 3 not-hero protagonists for help. The mayor, who acts as a straight man, tries to reason with the 3 protagonists, but they all turn him down for their own selfish reasons. Not only that, but the way they turn down the mayor is so obnoxious that he quickly changes his mind about wanting their help entirely and just asks them to fucking leave. Gleobren the cleric then proceeds to accidentally destroy the entire village while trying to convert them to his religion. The game would have greatly benefited from this, with the psychopathic main characters interacting more often with sane people who just need help. But this is really the only time something like this happens. Usually everyone else is just as insane as they are, and they don't even so much as try to contrast with the main characters in a meaningful thematic fashion. This isn't like Panty and Stocking. Our protagonists won't eventually meet Scanty and Knee Socks and have a contrast between highly moral villains and incredibly immoral heroes. No, nothing like that. It's not interested in being that interesting. Its primary function is to be a highly offensive parodical thrill ride without any of the depth. You won't find anything of emotional or intellectual value here, and that's the world of difference between a game like this and something like Postal 3. But just like Postal 3, Dungeons is still a video game, and surprisingly there are a few segments where the dark humor and parody bleed over into the game mechanics instead of being purely relegated to story. These are the best segments in the game. Just like in Golden Axe, when our 3 protagonists in Dungeons sleep, thieves descend upon them and take their things. Just like in Golden Axe, the idea is to soundly beat the shit out of them to get your stuff back, but they don't stay down unless you beat them up near the campfire. And when you beat them up near the campfire, they catch a flame, screaming loudly and running into the background to catch the forest on fire. After all of them have caught in a flame and the forest is burned to the ground, the segment is completed. This is a perfect marriage of all the things Dungeons wants to be. It successfully subverts the expectations of anyone who grew up playing Golden Axe. It then turns that subversion into an interesting game mechanic that requires knowledge of the beat-em-up genre and how hitboxes work. And your reward for solving the puzzle of this new one-off enemy type is that more dark humor ensues. For once, everything lines up, and it all works out splendidly. Your interaction and input into the parody is the catalyst for the dark humor in this instance, and for once it feels like interactive art. Good job, Dungeons! But unfortunately, there is also an actual entire beat-em-up here beyond just that one special segment, and it is dreadful. It would be unfair to say that the hitboxes are unreliable or inconsistent. They're perfectly consistent and they work 100% of the time. It would be more fair to call them unpredictable. Things just don't hit where you'd think they would, and hitboxes and hurtboxes don't exist in the places that you would reasonably expect if you're familiar with the beat-em-up genre. Which means that if you're not familiar with the beat-em-up genre, it's going to be even more frustrating. The actual enemy and boss design is all over the fucking map. The first boss is one of the hardest, the second boss one of the easiest, and the difficulty just slides wildly up and down. Some of the bosses and enemies are designed with deliberate openings, and others seem to just break out of your attacks and attack you back whenever they feel like it. It's utter madness. At its best, some of the boss fights, like the Broger, are reminiscent of better beat-em-up video games, and I felt like I was playing something I actually enjoyed. Solving a puzzle using my brain, and then attacking where it's appropriate to destroy the enemy. Unfortunately, that's all an illusion. You see, you might think the worst of it is when, after the hardest boss in the game, all of the enemies in the next room just stand still and refuse to attack you for the duration of the combat segment until they eventually self-destruct, thereby destroying any hope of consistent puzzle solving or mental engagement in the game mechanics. But you'd be wrong, because any hope of engaging with the game design was destroyed long before the enemies stopped functioning, and you learned the difficulty curve is more like a wibbly-wobbly difficulty noodle. No, instead, if you're like me, any hope of engaging with the game design was instead destroyed when you found out that there were infinite fucking continues. The game has what I can only assume is a continue counter in the top left corner, but not only is 10 continues way too many for a game this short, but you can keep continuing after the continue counter is gone, and continuing does not even reset your score to 0. There is no reason to pay attention to the game design. You can totally just button mash and glide your way through everything, ignoring all of the boss patterns and just mashing attack and flailing wildly until it's over. There are ways to design around this. In LEGO games, for example, it's impossible to permanently die, but when you die, you lose studs, and if you care about collecting things, then it's a big deal when you die and lose studs. And games like Dynasty Warriors are most certainly button mashers that aren't meant to present any kind of traditional challenge, but it's more about pushing yourself to create the most satisfying combos and destroying as many enemies as possible. But because of dungeons having unpredictable hit detection, uneven enemy difficulty, and even unsatisfying hit sparks, there's no reason to be engaged with the actual gameplay content. Dungeons is overall a game that pretends to have game design that matters, pretends to have a story that matters, and pretends to have challenge that matters, but none of those things are true. It's overall a very sad and shallow experience, with one or two bright spots that I went out of my way to explicitly highlight in this video for you. And on top of that, it has the audacity to end on a fucking cliffhanger. I really did not enjoy Dungeons, and I also think it's quite bad. Dreadful, even.